Maya Rodriguez stepped through the glass doors of Elite Fitness Academy, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The gym buzzed with the sound of weights clanking, treadmills humming, and trainers shouting commands. She pulled her hood up slightly, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she approached the front desk. "I'm here about the personal training position," she said quietly to the receptionist, a blonde woman with perfectly applied makeup who looked her up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Training position?" The receptionist's voice carried just enough volume to catch the attention of three men nearby. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The three trainers turned toward Maya with amused expressions. Brad, the head trainer, was a mountain of muscle with arms covered in tribal tattoos. He wore a tank top that showed off his physique and a smirk that suggested he found Maya's presence entertaining. Beside him stood Derek, tall and lean with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged, and Tony, shorter but built like a bulldog with a gold chain glinting around his thick neck. "This should be interesting," Brad muttered to his colleagues, loud enough for Maya to hear. "What's next?" "Hiring kindergarten teachers as bouncers." Derek laughed, crossing his arms. "Maybe she's lost. The yoga studio is down the street, sweetheart." Maya kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have an appointment with the manager about the training position. My name is Maya Rodriguez." Tony stepped forward, circling her like a predator sizing up prey. "Rodriguez, huh? Let me guess, you've got some kind of fitness certification from a weekend course? Maybe did some Zumba classes and think you're ready for the big leagues." The other gym members had started to notice the commotion. A few clients on nearby equipment slowed their workouts, sensing drama. Maya remained perfectly still, her hands loose at her sides, but those who knew what to look for might have noticed the way she balanced her weight, ready to move in any direction. "I have the qualifications listed in the job posting," Maya replied evenly. "Perhaps we could discuss this with the manager?" Brad laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the gym. "Qualifications? Lady, this isn't some suburban fitness center where housewives come to chat on elliptical machines. We train serious athletes here. Professional fighters, military personnel on leave, law enforcement. People who could bench press you for warm-up sets." "Speaking of military," Derek chimed in, "my cousin just got back from Iraq. Real tough guy. He'd get a kick out of seeing someone like you trying to train actual soldiers." Maya's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement, but she remained silent. The manager, a harried-looking man in his 50s named Jim, finally emerged from his office. He glanced between Maya and his trainers, immediately sensing the tension. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. These are three of our senior trainers." "We've met," Maya said simply. Jim looked confused by the atmosphere, but pressed on. "Well, let's discuss your background. The position requires working with high-level clients, including military personnel and law enforcement. Do you have experience with tactical fitness training?" Before Maya could answer, Tony snorted. "Tactical fitness? Jim, look at her. She probably thinks tactical training means wearing camouflage yoga pants." The comment drew chuckles from a few nearby gym members. Maya noticed a group of off-duty police officers watching from the weight area, their expressions a mix of amusement and curiosity. "I have some experience with military-style training," Maya said carefully, her voice giving nothing away. Brad stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over her smaller form. "Some experience? Listen, Princess, I've been training cops and soldiers for 15 years. I know what real tactical conditioning looks like. It's not about looking cute in workout gear. It's about functional strength," Derek added, warming to his theme. "Combat readiness. Being able to carry a wounded teammate while under fire. Can you even do a proper pull-up?" Maya glanced around the gym, noting the pull-up bar station across the room. Several clients had gathered to watch the exchange, drawn by the trainer's increasingly loud commentary. "Why don't you show us what you've got?" Tony suggested with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Brad here can do 30 pull-ups with a 40-pound weight belt. Derek holds the gym record for fastest mile in full combat gear. What's your claim to fame?" The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Maya looked at each of the three trainers, then at the growing audience. She could feel the weight of expectations, the assumption that she would either back down or humiliate herself, try to prove something she couldn't prove. Jim cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should take this to my office." "No," Maya said quietly, but with enough firmness to cut through the chatter. "It's fine. I understand the need to evaluate capabilities." She walked toward the pull-up station with measured steps, the crowd parting before her. The three trainers followed, their confidence growing with each step. This was going to be even easier than they'd thought. Maya removed her hoodie, revealing a simple black tank top that showed lean, defined arms marked with a few small scars that could have been from any number of activities. She rolled her shoulders once, twice, then reached up to grip the bar with hands that seemed too small for the task ahead. "This is painful to watch," Brad murmured to Derek. "Should we stop her before she embarrasses herself?" Maya pulled herself up with a smooth, controlled motion that immediately silenced the murmurs. Her form was perfect, her movement efficient. She lowered herself with the same control and repeated the motion. "Lucky first couple," Tony said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Maya continued, her breathing steady, her movements precise. 5 pull-ups. 10. 15. The crowd had gone completely quiet except for the soft sound of her controlled breathing and the whisper of her hands shifting on the bar. At 20, Brad's smirk had vanished. At 25, Derek was staring with open mouth. At 30, Tony had stopped making jokes entirely. Maya completed her 35th pull-up and held herself at the top for a moment, looking down at the three trainers with eyes that had gone from quiet to something approaching predatory. She dropped to the ground with barely a sound, landing in a perfect crouch that spoke of training far beyond any civilian gym. When she stood, there wasn't even a slight tremor in her arms. 35, she said simply, her breathing only slightly elevated. "Should I continue?" The silence in the gym was deafening. Brad opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again without producing any sound. Derek had taken a small step backward, his bravado evaporating like morning mist. Tony, trying to salvage the situation, forced a laugh. "Not bad, but pull-ups are just one exercise. This job requires comprehensive fitness knowledge, client management skills, and the ability to handle difficult personalities." Maya interrupted softly, her gaze moving from one trainer to the next. "I understand completely." She picked up her hoodie and turned back to Jim, who was staring at her with new interest. "Shall we continue the interview in your office?" As she walked away, the three trainers were left standing by the pull-up bar, their world suddenly feeling less certain than it had 5 minutes earlier. Around them, the other gym members whispered among themselves, and more than one person was looking at the quiet woman with the devastating pull-up count with new respect. Maya Rodriguez had just served notice that appearances could be deceiving. What the trainers didn't know was that she had completed those 35 pull-ups while deliberately limiting herself. In full combat gear, with a 50-pound pack, she had once done 63 consecutive pull-ups during a training exercise that had broken 3 other operators. But that was a story for another time. For now, she had a job interview to complete. Maya emerged from Jim's office 45 minutes later with a training schedule and a set of keys to the equipment lockers. The manager had been surprisingly thorough in his questioning, and she had answered each inquiry with the careful precision of someone accustomed to briefings and debriefings. She had provided references from previous fitness positions that would check out under casual scrutiny, though the real story behind those references would never see the light of day. The 3 trainers were waiting for her near the front desk, their earlier shock having transformed into something resembling wounded pride. Brad stood with his arms crossed, his massive frame blocking part of the walkway in a posture designed to intimidate. Derek leaned against the wall with forced casualness, while Tony paced like a caged animal. "Congratulations," Brad said as Maya approached, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You pulled off a nice party trick. But tomorrow you start working with real clients, not showing off for tourists." Maya nodded politely. "I'll look forward to it." "Look forward to it," Derek pushed off from the wall. Do you even know what you've signed up for? We've got active duty Marines coming in here, SWAT team members, guys who've seen actual combat. They're not going to be impressed by your gymnastic routine, especially when they realize you probably learned those pull-ups in some CrossFit box, Tony added, his gold chain catching the light as he gestured dismissively. Real tactical training is about more than showing off. It's about building warriors. Maya's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. Warriors? That's right. Brad stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over her. Men who've faced life and death situations, who've had bullets fired at them in anger, who know what it means to put their lives on the line for their country. The irony of the statement was lost on the three trainers, but it wasn't lost on Maya. She had been in more combat situations than all three of them combined, though her missions had never made the evening news and never would. The men standing before her had built their reputations training people who serve their country. Maya had spent the last 8 years bleeding for hers. I see, she said quietly, and you feel qualified to train these warriors because... Derek laughed. Because we've been doing this for years. Brad served 4 years in the Army, I did 6 years in the Marines, and Tony was Navy. Tony finished proudly. 2 deployments to the Persian Gulf. We're not playing dress-up here, sweetheart. We've got the credentials to back up our methods. Maya absorbed this information without comment. 4 years Army, 6 years Marines, 2 Navy deployments. Respectable service records, certainly, but nothing that approached the selection criteria for the unit that had shaped the last decade of her life. She had undergone training that had a 90% washout rate, operated in theaters these men had never heard of, and carried out missions that existed only in classified files buried so deep that most generals would never see them. But she kept these thoughts to herself and simply nodded. That's impressive experience. Brad misinterpreted her response as submission to their authority. Glad you understand the hierarchy here. Now, tomorrow you'll be shadowing us for the first week, watching how real trainers handle serious clients. Maybe you'll learn something. Your first client is at 6 a.m., Derek added with a cruel smile. Staff Sergeant Morrison, just back from Afghanistan. He's not exactly patient with incompetence, and he specifically requested our most experienced trainer, Tony, chimed in. So you'll get to watch a master at work. Maya checked her watch. It was nearly 8 in the evening, which meant she would need to be here in 10 hours. After 8 years of pre-dawn mission briefs and middle-of-the-night deployments, the early start time didn't concern her. What interested her more was the opportunity to meet an actual combat veteran who might appreciate the difference between genuine tactical training and the gym-based interpretation she suspected she was about to witness. 6 a.m., she repeated. I'll be here. Make sure you are, Brad said, his tone carrying an implicit threat. And make sure you're ready to see how the professionals handle things. This isn't amateur hour anymore. As the 3 trainers walked away, conferring among themselves in low voices punctuated by occasional glances back at Maya, she remained by the front desk, ostensibly reviewing her new paperwork. In reality, she was conducting the kind of environmental assessment that had become second nature during her years of operational service. The gym was larger than it had initially appeared, with separate areas for cardio equipment, free weights, and functional fitness. There was a small studio room for private training sessions and what looked like a martial arts area with mats and heavy bags. The clientele was exactly what the trainers had claimed: serious fitness enthusiasts, off-duty law enforcement, and military personnel. More importantly, she noted the security cameras, exit points, and sight lines throughout the facility. Old habits from a profession where situational awareness meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, seeing a brief coded message that looked like a weather update to anyone who might be watching. In reality, it was a check-in from her handler, confirming that her cover assignment was proceeding as planned. The official story, if anyone cared to dig, was that Maya Rodriguez was a former Army medic taking time off from her reserve duties to pursue civilian fitness training. The paperwork would support that narrative, complete with service records and medical certifications that were technically accurate, if incomplete. The real story was that Maya Rodriguez was currently on administrative leave, pending a psychological evaluation following a classified incident in Syria. The evaluation would eventually clear her for duty, but for now, she needed to maintain a low profile while staying in peak physical condition. A civilian training position provided the perfect cover. What her superiors hadn't anticipated was that her new workplace would be populated by former servicemen who seemed to confuse their limited military experience with expertise in training elite operators. The situation was developing into something far more complex than a simple cover assignment. Maya finished reviewing her paperwork and headed for the exit. Tomorrow would be interesting. She found herself looking forward to meeting Staff Sergeant Morrison and discovering whether Brad's version of professional training would impress an actual combat veteran. As she reached the door, she heard Tony's voice carrying across the gym. "Did you see the look on her face when we told her about Morrison? She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Maya allowed herself a small smile as she stepped into the evening air. If only they knew how accurate that statement was, though not in the way Tony intended. Tomorrow, the real education would begin, and Maya suspected that she wouldn't be the one learning the most important lessons. Maya arrived at the gym at 5:30 the next morning, 30 minutes before her required time. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few dedicated early exercisers and what appeared to be military vehicles. She recognized the bearing of the men walking toward the entrance even before she saw their high-end, tight haircuts and the way they carried themselves with the distinctive posture of active-duty personnel. Inside, Brad was already setting up equipment for the morning session, his movements efficient but lacking the economic precision Maya was accustomed to seeing in truly elite operators. He glanced up as she entered, his expression suggesting he was mildly surprised to see her on time. "Coffee's in the back office," he said without preamble. "You'll want to caffeinate before this session. Morrison's bringing 3 of his squad mates, and they're not interested in gentle workouts." Maya nodded and retrieved a cup of black coffee, noting that Brad had already consumed what appeared to be a significant amount of caffeine based on his energy level and slight tremor in his hands. She positioned herself near the training area where she could observe without interfering, settling into the relaxed alertness that had served her well during countless mission briefings. At precisely 6 a.m., the gym doors opened to admit 4 men who immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the facility. Staff Sergeant Morrison led the group, a compact man with sun-weathered features and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in his field of view. Behind him came 3 soldiers whose bearing suggested they had recently returned from deployment, their movements economical and their expressions serious. Brad straightened his shoulders and approached with the kind of aggressive confidence Maya had seen many times in people trying to establish dominance with genuine warriors. It rarely ended well. "Sergeant Morrison," Brad called out, his voice carrying across the gym. "Ready for another ass-kicking session?" Morrison's response was polite, but measured. "Good morning, Brad. We're ready to work." "Outstanding. Today we're focusing on functional strength and combat conditioning." Brad gestured toward the equipment he had prepared. "I've got a circuit designed to push you beyond your comfort zones." Maya watched as Brad began explaining his training philosophy, using terminology that sounded impressive to civilians but rang hollow to anyone with actual tactical experience. He spoke about warrior mindset and battlefield preparation, while describing exercises that would have been useful for general fitness, but bore little resemblance to the specific demands of combat operations. Morrison and his men listened politely, but Maya caught the subtle glances they exchanged. She recognized the look of professionals being lectured by someone who clearly didn't understand the realities of their work. "First station," Brad announced, "is weighted bear crawls with combat simulation. You'll crawl 50 meters while I provide auditory stress simulation." Maya nearly choked on her coffee. Auditory stress simulation meant Brad would be yelling at them while they performed an exercise that, while physically demanding, had virtually no practical application for combat operations. Real stress simulation involved live rounds, time pressure, and consequences for failure that went far beyond missing a workout. Morrison caught her reaction and glanced in her direction. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw a flicker of recognition in his expression. Not recognition of her identity, but recognition of someone who understood exactly how absurd the situation had become. Before we start, Morrison said diplomatically, "Could you explain the tactical rationale for the bear crawl exercise? In what combat scenarios would this movement pattern be applicable?" Brad paused, clearly not having expected the question. "Well, it's about building functional strength, core stability under stress, the kind of strength you need in combat situations." "I see," Morrison replied neutrally. "And the weighted component simulates." "Equipment load," Brad answered quickly. "Combat gear, ammunition, that sort of thing." One of Morrison's soldiers, a lean man with sergeant stripes and an expression of barely contained amusement, spoke up. "Sergeant, if you don't mind me asking, what's your combat experience background?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Maya could see Brad's jaw tighten as he realized he was being politely challenged by people who actually understood the subject matter he claimed to be teaching. "4 years, Army," Brad replied, his tone becoming defensive, "including deployment to Iraq." "What unit?" Morrison asked, still polite, but with an undertone that suggested he was conducting his own evaluation. "Transportation Company," Brad admitted reluctantly. "But I've trained hundreds of combat personnel since then. I know it works." Maya watched the subtle shift in the soldier's posture. Transportation companies were essential to military operations, but their combat experience was typically limited compared to infantry or special operations units. Brad's defensive reaction and his need to emphasize his civilian training experience only highlighted the gap between his actual qualifications and his claims to expertise. Morrison nodded diplomatically. "Transportation is crucial work. Keeping supply lines open saves lives." The statement was perfectly respectful and completely devastating. By acknowledging Brad's service while simultaneously emphasizing its non-combat nature, Morrison had managed to deflate the trainer's authority without direct confrontation. Brad seemed to sense he was losing control of the situation. "Look, theory is one thing, but practical application is another. Let me show you what real conditioning looks like." He moved to a kettlebell station and began demonstrating an exercise combination that was indeed physically demanding, but incorporated several movements that would be counterproductive in actual tactical situations. Maya could see Morrison watching with the patience of a professional who had learned to tolerate inefficiency when necessary. "Ma'am," one of Morrison's soldiers said quietly, having approached Maya's observation position, "are you part of the training staff here?" "I start today," Maya replied equally quietly. "Maya Rodriguez." "Corporal Jenkins," the soldier introduced himself. "Mind if I ask you background? You seem to be evaluating this differently than our enthusiastic trainer." Maya glanced at Morrison, who had clearly noticed the conversation and was listening while maintaining his polite attention to Brad's demonstration. She made a decision that would change the entire dynamic of the morning. "Former military," she said simply. "Medical training, some tactical experience." "What kind of tactical experience?" Morrison asked directly, stepping away from Brad's demonstration. Maya met his eyes steadily. "The kind that doesn't get discussed in civilian gyms." The simple statement conveyed more than a paragraph of explanation. Morrison's expression shifted to one of genuine interest, while his soldiers moved almost unconsciously into a loose formation that allowed them to listen while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. Brad, realizing he had lost his audience, called out sharply, "We're here to train, not chat." "Rodriguez, you're supposed to be observing proper training techniques." Morrison turned back to Brad with an expression that had gone from polite to coolly professional. "Actually, I think we'd like to hear Ms. Rodriguez's perspective on tactical conditioning. If she has relevant experience, it might be valuable input." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Brad found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his authority questioned by both his clients and his newest employee. Maya could see him struggling between his desire to maintain dominance and his need to avoid alienating paying customers. Fine, Brad said through gritted teeth. Rodriguez, show them your version of functional training. Maya stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had hoped to maintain her low profile for at least a few weeks, but the situation had evolved beyond that possibility. Morrison and his men were real professionals who deserved better than pseudo-tactical nonsense, and her cover story provided enough legitimacy to offer genuine insight. Functional training depends on the function you're preparing for, she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to briefing operations. What specific scenarios are you training to address? Morrison smiled for the first time that morning. Now that's the right question. Maya moved to the center of the training area with a fluid economy of motion that marked truly elite operators. Morrison and his soldiers formed a loose semicircle around her, their body language shifting from polite attention to genuine interest. Brad stood to one side, his arms crossed, and his expression darkening as he realized the dynamic in his gym was about to change dramatically. Before we discuss training methods, Maya said, her voice carrying easily through the space, what's your current operational status? Just returned from a 12-month deployment, Morrison replied. We got 6 weeks of leave before reassignment. Looking to maintain conditioning and address some specific deficiencies that became apparent downrange. Maya nodded, recognizing the careful language of a professional discussing classified matters. Deficiencies in physical preparation or tactical execution? Both, admitted Corporal Jenkins. The reality is that gym fitness doesn't always translate to operational effectiveness. We need functional strength that applies to mission-specific scenarios. Brad stepped forward, his territorial instincts overriding his better judgment. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you. The circuit I designed addresses functional movement patterns under stress conditions. Maya turned to look at him with an expression that was perfectly neutral and somehow more devastating than open criticism. Your bear crawl exercise. In what operational scenario would a soldier need to crawl 50 meters while carrying a weight that isn't mission-essential equipment? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brad opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. It's about building core strength and mental toughness. Mental toughness, Maya repeated quietly. Sergeant Morrison, in your experience, is mental toughness developed through arbitrary physical challenges or through training that directly relates to mission success? Morrison's answer was immediate. Mission-specific training. Mental toughness comes from confidence in your preparation and your team. Arbitrary suffering just creates stress without purpose. Maya turned back to the group, dismissing Brad's presence as completely as if he had left the room. What specific scenarios are you preparing for? Urban operations, Morrison replied. Close quarters combat, building clearance, protecting civilians in hostile environments. Then, let's design training that addresses those requirements. Maya moved to a section of the gym where various equipment was available. Urban operations require explosive movement from static positions, precise motor control under stress, and the ability to transition rapidly between different movement patterns. She selected a medicine ball, a set of resistance bands, and positioned herself near a set of parallel bars. Functional training for urban combat should incorporate situational awareness, decision-making under physical stress, and movement patterns that directly translate to tactical applications. What happened next would be discussed among Morrison's unit for years afterward. Maya began demonstrating a training sequence that bore no resemblance to traditional gym workouts. Every movement had a purpose that was immediately recognizable to combat veterans. Explosive entries, controlled movement through confined spaces, weapon transitions, and the kind of fine motor control required for precision shooting after intense physical exertion. This isn't a workout, she explained while performing movements that required extraordinary strength and coordination. This is rehearsal. Every exercise should prepare you for a specific aspect of mission execution. She demonstrated a sequence that involved burpees integrated with precision movements, simulating the physical stress of combat followed by the need for accurate shooting. The medicine ball became a stand-in for breaching charges, requiring careful handling and precise placement under time pressure. The resistance bands simulated the weight and awkwardness of mission-essential equipment. Morrison and his soldiers watched with the focused attention of professionals recognizing expertise that far exceeded their own. The movements Maya demonstrated weren't just physically demanding. They were tactically sophisticated in ways that revealed extensive operational experience. "Your turn," Maya said to Jenkins, offering him the medicine ball. "Imagine you're breaching a door while under fire. You need to place the charge, take cover, and be ready for immediate entry. Your heart rate is already elevated from the approach movement." Jenkins accepted the challenge, attempting to replicate Maya's demonstration. His military fitness was evident, but the specific skills she had shown required practice and understanding that couldn't be developed in a traditional gym setting. "Good," Maya said as Jenkins completed the sequence. "Now, imagine you've been awake for 18 hours, you're carrying 60 pounds of gear, and you know there are civilians in the building you're about to enter." She added complexity to the exercise, incorporating elements that forced decision-making under stress. The soldiers began to understand that they were experiencing something entirely different from conventional fitness training. Brad watched from the sidelines, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and something approaching awe. The woman he had dismissed as a pretender was demonstrating capabilities that exposed the vast gap between his gym-based understanding of tactical training and the reality of elite military operations. Derek and Tony had arrived early and stood near the entrance, their usual morning bravado replaced by stunned silence. They were witnessing a masterclass in applied tactical training delivered by someone who clearly had extensive real-world experience. "Ma'am," Morrison said when Maya paused the demonstration, "what unit were you with?" Maya met his eyes steadily. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics. Let's say I had opportunities to learn from very experienced instructors." The careful phrasing told Morrison everything he needed to know. Someone with Maya's demonstrated capabilities, operating undercover in a civilian gym, was likely associated with units that didn't officially exist. He nodded once, accepting the boundaries while acknowledging the expertise. "Would you be willing to work with my team during our leave period?" Morrison asked. "We can discuss compensation privately." Before Maya could respond, Brad stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is still my gym and my training program. Rodriguez is new here, and she's supposed to be learning our methods." Morrison turned to look at Brad with an expression that had gone completely cold. "Your methods involve having soldiers perform bear crawls while you yell at them. Her methods involve preparing warriors for actual combat. There's no comparison." The words landed with the impact of physical blows. Brad's face cycled through several shades of red as he realized that his authority had been not just questioned, but completely undermined by someone he had tried to intimidate. "You can't just take over my session," Brad protested, his voice rising. "I'm a head trainer here. I have years of experience." "Experience doing what?" Maya asked quietly. "Training people to perform exercises that have no tactical application, creating artificial stress that bears no resemblance to combat pressure, building false confidence through irrelevant challenges." Her questions weren't delivered with anger or mockery, but with the clinical precision of someone conducting an after-action review. Somehow, that made them more devastating than any display of emotion would have been. Morrison stepped closer to Brad, his voice dropping to a tone that suggested he was exercising considerable restraint. "Let me make this simple. We're paying customers, and we want to train with someone who actually understands our requirements. Ms. Rodriguez clearly has that understanding. Do we have a problem?" The challenge was unmistakable, and Brad found himself facing a choice between his wounded pride and his business sense. Around the gym, other clients had stopped their workouts to watch the confrontation, and several were clearly siding with the soldiers. Maya watched the exchange with the detached interest of someone accustomed to analyzing power dynamics in hostile environments. In a few minutes, she had gone from anonymous new employee to the center of a conflict that would define her cover assignment for the foreseeable future. The question now was whether she could maintain her low profile while providing the kind of training that Morrison's team actually needed. Based on Brad's expression, that was going to be considerably more challenging than she had anticipated. The tension in the gym had reached a breaking point when Jim, the manager, emerged from his office with a coffee cup in hand and immediately sensed the hostile atmosphere. His eyes moved quickly from Brad's flushed face to Morrison's military bearing, then to Maya, who stood in the center of the conflict with the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to far more dangerous confrontations. "Is there a problem here?" Jim asked, his managerial instincts kicking in as he noticed several other clients watching the scene unfold. Brad immediately launched into an explanation. "Morrison's team wants Rodriguez to take over their training session. She's undermining established protocols, and she's providing actual tactical training." Morrison interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard the first time he spoke. "Something we weren't getting from your current program." Jim's expression shifted as he processed the implications. Morrison's team represented significant monthly revenue, and their satisfaction could influence other military clients. Maya represented an unknown quantity who had somehow managed to impress legitimate combat veterans within an hour of starting work. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Jim suggested, but Morrison shook his head. "No need for privacy. Ms. Rodriguez has demonstrated capabilities that directly address our training requirements. We'd like to arrange private sessions with her during our leave period." Derek and Tony had moved closer, drawn by the confrontation, but uncertain how to support their colleague without making the situation worse. They watched as their established hierarchy crumbled under the weight of actual expertise. Maya spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "Mr. Jim, I don't want to cause problems for the gym's existing training programs. Perhaps there's a way to accommodate everyone's needs." "Like what?" Brad demanded, his pride preventing him from accepting any solution that didn't restore his authority. Maya looked directly at him, and, for the first time since the confrontation began, her expression carried something approaching sympathy, like acknowledging that different clients have different requirements. "Your general fitness programs serve most clients very well, but military personnel preparing for deployment need specialized training that draws on operational experience." The diplomatic phrasing offered Brad a face-saving exit, but his wounded ego prevented him from accepting it gracefully. "Are you saying I'm not qualified to train military clients?" "I'm saying that tactical training requires tactical experience," Maya replied simply. "Just like medical training requires medical experience, or legal training requires legal experience." Morrison stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to resolve the situation without further humiliation for Brad. "Look, we're not criticizing anyone's qualifications for general training, but we need mission-specific preparation that goes beyond conventional fitness." Jim saw the path forward and seized it. "What if we established a specialized tactical training program? Maya could work with military and law enforcement clients who need that specific expertise, while our existing trainers continue with their established client base." It was a reasonable solution that should have satisfied everyone, but Brad's pride was too wounded for reasonable solutions. "She's been here for one day. We don't even know her real qualifications. For all we know, she could be making everything up." The statement hung in the air like an accusation, and Maya felt the weight of Morrison's attention as he waited to see how she would respond. She had hoped to maintain her cover story, but the situation had evolved beyond that possibility. "You want to see my qualifications?" Maya asked quietly. Before anyone could respond, she moved to a section of the gym where various training equipment was stored. She selected items that most people would consider unrelated: a balance ball, resistance bands, a set of weights, and a timer. "Operational scenario," she announced, her voice taking on the clipped tones of someone delivering a mission briefing. "Building clearance. unknown number of hostiles, civilian casualties possible. Team insertion through second floor window, stairwell access compromised. She began setting up the equipment in a configuration that transformed the gym space into something resembling a tactical training environment. Morrison and his soldiers immediately recognized what was happening and positioned themselves to participate. Rules of engagement. Positive identification required before engagement. Civilian safety is primary concern. Ammunition is limited. Maya, check her watch. Mission time limit, for minutes. Questions. Jenkins raised his hand. Ma'am, are we using simulated weapons? Finger pointing, but weapon discipline applies. Safety violations and the exercise immediately. Maya positioned herself at what represented the entry point. Remember, this is assessment and training, not competition. What followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in Elite Fitness Academy. Maya orchestrated a tactical exercise that required split-second decision-making, precise movement, and coordination under pressure. She played multiple roles: team leader, opposing forces, and civilian casualties, all while maintaining running commentary on tactical principles and operational procedures. The soldiers performed well, but it was immediately obvious that they were being led by someone with extensive real-world experience. Maya's instructions were specific, practical, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had executed similar missions under actual combat conditions. Brad, Derek, and Tony watched in stunned silence as their understanding of tactical training was completely redefined. This wasn't gym-based simulation. This was professional military instruction adapted to civilian facilities. When the exercise concluded, Morrison and his team were breathing hard but energized. The kind of mental engagement they had just experienced was exactly what they needed to maintain their edge during leave time. Outstanding, Morrison said, checking his own time. That's the first training session I've had in a civilian gym that actually felt relevant to operational requirements. Maya nodded, then turned to address the group that had gathered to watch. Tactical training isn't about being tougher than everyone else. It's about being prepared for specific scenarios that require specific skills. Different missions require different preparation. She looked directly at Brad as she continued. General fitness training builds the foundation. Tactical training builds on that foundation to address mission-specific requirements. Both have their place. Jim sees the opportunity to solidify the solution. So we're agreed? Maya will handle tactical training for military and law enforcement clients, while our existing programs continue for general fitness. Morrison nodded immediately. We like to arrange 5 sessions per week for the next 6 weeks. Private training, tactical focus. Before Brad could object, Derek surprised everyone by speaking up. Could we observe some of these sessions? From a professional development perspective. Maya looked at him with interest. You want to learn tactical training methods? After what we just saw? Absolutely. Tony nodded agreement. We've been training military clients without really understanding their requirements. Maybe we could learn something. Brad stared at his colleagues as if they had betrayed him, but Maya's response was characteristically diplomatic. Tactical training principles can enhance any fitness program. The emphasis on functional movement, situational awareness, and stress management applies to civilian fitness as well. Jim grinned, recognizing a win-win solution. Excellent. Maya, you'll lead tactical training programs and help develop our staff's capabilities. Everyone maintains their existing client relationships, and we expand our service offerings. As the group dispersed to begin their respective training sessions, Morrison approached Maya privately. Ma'am, I don't know your full background, but I recognize real operational experience when I see it. Thank you for taking us seriously. Maya met his eyes steadily. Thank you for being professionals worth taking seriously. As Morrison rejoined his team, Maya found herself facing a dramatically different situation than she had anticipated when she walked into the gym 24 hours earlier. Her cover assignment had evolved into something approaching her actual expertise, and she had gained the respect of both legitimate warriors and civilian trainers. Brad approached her as she was storing equipment, his expression subdued. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I underestimated you." Maya studied his face, recognizing the difficulty of the admission. "Apology accepted. We all have areas where we can improve. Would you be willing to show me some of those techniques? Not to take over your sessions, but to understand them better." For the first time since arriving at the gym, Maya smiled genuinely. "I'd be happy to. Good training benefits everyone." As she gathered her things to leave, Maya reflected on the unexpected turn her cover assignment had taken. Instead of maintaining a low profile, she had ended up in a position where she could use her actual skills while helping genuine professionals maintain their readiness. Her phone buzzed with another coded message from her handler. She would have an interesting report to file tonight. The mission parameters had changed, but perhaps for the better. Tomorrow, she would begin training warriors again. It felt like coming home.